The word tycoon comes from Japanese, where the word refers to an independent ruler who did not have an imperial lineage. Indeed, this is an apt name for the captains of industry during the Gilded Age of the late 1800s. Cornelius Vanderbilt's great-great-great-grandfather came to America from the Netherlands as an indentured servant. By the time he was around 50 years old, Cornelius was the richest man in America, having built a railroad and steamship empire. His company was critical to the Union's naval effort during the Civil War. Then there's Andrew Carnegie. Born in a one-room cottage in Scotland, his family came to America looking for work. Carnegie became a business magnate, starting in telegraphs and then railroads, and eventually creating U.S. Steel in 1901 at the age of 66, which catapulted him to the top of the list of wealthiest people in the world. And of course, there's John D. Rockefeller, who was born into a large and poor family in New York in 1839. By 1870, when he was 31, he founded the Standard Oil Company. Within 20 years, he was the richest man in the world, a tenure interrupted by Carnegie for a bit, but historians agree that Rockefeller was likely the wealthiest person in the history of the world. If we turn back to our Adam Smith, there's one thing we don't want businesses to be, and that's big. Without significant competition to drive out inefficiency, resources are misused and unfair practices go unabated. In America, many states began to introduce laws which restricted the size of businesses. Business tycoons like Rockefeller had to find ways around them to keep their companies together, so they started to form trusts. A trust is a legal arrangement in which a person gives someone else the right to hold assets on their behalf. In this context, the shareholders of different companies, which would otherwise all compete with each other, place their shares into a legal trust, which is then governed by a board of trustees. In the case of Rockefeller's Standard Oil, for example, 37 different shareholders placed their shares into the trust controlled by Rockefeller and 8 others. This allowed Rockefeller to control the companies owned by the others and operate them as one large monopoly. Trusts quickly became a way for clever industrialists to consolidate their market power. One example is the American Tobacco Company. James Buchanan Duke had just entered the growing cigarette business in 1879 with W. Duke, Sons and Company. At the time, cigarettes had to be rolled by hand, and a skilled cigarette roller could produce about 200 cigarettes per hour. One major cigarette producer, Allen and Ginter, offered a reward to anyone who could invent a machine which would roll and cut cigarettes. An inventor named James Bonsack rose to the occasion and delivered his machine to Allen and Ginter, which produced 200 cigarettes per minute, and expected the $75,000 bounty in return. But the company rejected his machine, claiming it was unreliable. But really, they were worried about consumer focus groups, which responded negatively to the uniformly cut cigarettes. James Duke, or Buck, as his friends called him, saw an opportunity. He bought the exclusive rights to Bonsack's machine and wagered that consumers would adjust to the new cigarettes when they saw the lower price. He was right, and within a decade, his company was the biggest cigarette maker in the country. Duke went to his competitors with an idea. They would form a holding company, which would operate all the cigarette companies jointly. He called it the American Tobacco Company, and he got other major manufacturers to join in, putting him in charge of them all. Duke's company was joined by W.S. Kimball & Company, Kinney Tobacco, Goodwin & Company, and yup, you guessed it, Allen and Ginter. Together, they controlled 90% of the cigarette market, and under Duke's control, the company grew 12 times as large. Buck Duke became one of the wealthiest men in the country, and in 1924, he gave $19 million to Trinity College in his home state of North Carolina, which is the equivalent of about $280 million in 2020. They were so thankful for the tremendous endowment, they renamed the whole school after him, and it's known today as Duke University. In 1890, the U.S. passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibited anti-competitive agreements and conduct which attempts to monopolize a market. In 1911, the American Tobacco Company was broken up into 4 separate companies by the same court ruling which broke up John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. And you can see on this chart that the companies that Standard Oil is broken up to are still around today under different names. In 1917, the law was used to break up Thomas Edison's monopolistic control on the motion picture industry, and as recently as 1982, it was used to break up the monopoly AT&T had on telephones. In 2001, the law was used to bring suit against Microsoft, but a settlement prevented the company from being broken up. In all history, though, there is only one company that has survived an antitrust suit unscathed, and that is Major League Baseball. Certain they would get a favorable ruling, in 1915, the newly formed Federal League sued the National League, which along with the American League make up the MLB. Their case was pretty simple. The organization was a collection of separate companies that each controlled one team. And by prohibiting teams from playing other teams outside the league, they were engaged in anti-competitive behavior. They filed in the court of Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Yes, his real name was Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who had the reputation of being a trust buster after he ordered John D. Rockefeller himself to testify in his courtroom. It was a slam dunk. But what the Federal League did not count on was the fact that Kennesaw Mountain Landis was a trust buster second and a baseball fan first. He ruled against them, and the case was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court at the time was led by former President William H. Taft, whose tenure in the White House also earned him a reputation as a trust buster. But Taft, too, was first and foremost a baseball fan. And he and the court ruled, absurdly I must say, that baseball did not constitute interstate commerce, and thus was not subject to the Antitrust Act. The ruling has stood unchallenged to this day, and if you know your baseball history, you know that when Major League Baseball was caught in a scandal and needed a commissioner to bring them out of it, they made Kennesaw Mountain Landis the first commissioner of Major League Baseball. Of course, we still have business tycoons today, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. It might be worth noting, though, that John D. Rockefeller's net worth was the equivalent of about 2% of GDP, and all 3 of these men would need to combine their wealth to reach a similar level. The other thing worth mentioning is that at the time of this recording, only Elon Musk is still running the companies he started. In every other case, from Standard Oil to Amazon, the company has lived beyond their founder. Prior to the Gilded Age, that was extremely rare. Most companies dissolved when their founder died, or the business partnership dissolved because the founders wanted to move on to other things. These days, companies live on for years, even centuries now, continually seeking ways to improve their products and contribute to economic growth. Important, too, is that there are no Vanderbilts or Carnegies or Rockefellers or Dukes on the Forbes list of wealthiest people in the world. In fact, in between Rockefeller and Bill Gates came people with names like H.L. Hunt and Daniel Ludwig and John Kludge, and I'm willing to bet you've never heard of them. But they were once the richest men in the country. The Gilded Age did not do away with the rich aristocracy, but none of these people were born into royalty. Creative destruction disrupts that aristocracy as much as it disrupts industry, replacing it every generation with new innovators. The giant businesses these tycoons create might not be as efficient as Adam Smith envisioned, and regulations like the Sherman Antitrust Act have improved on that, but they do seem to be indispensable engines of progress.